Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And this book by John Kotter is one that speaks to me, and certainly in my line of work. I first encountered this book in the mid-1990s as I was working on my doctorate, and it was part of one of the courses that I was taking. But as I moved back into the school system as a school administrator, I quickly found the value of this book. And so when I first read it, this was the cover, right? And so today, obviously a new edition, but it looks like this. But the 8-stage process that he outlines in here about leading change rings as true today as it did back then when I first encountered the book. And so John Kotter has been really one of those leading voices and leading professors around organizational change and around leading organizational change. And so for me, it was important because when I first went back into a school as an administrator, at that time, it was a school in the state of Florida, in Palm Beach County School District, that had been rated an F by the Florida Department of Education in terms of performance. And so I had encountered the principal that had just been named at church one day. And so she asked me if I would be interested in coming and leading a transformation of the school with her at that time. And you know, I thought about it and I thought, well, this is coming to me in church, this must mean something, right? So I accepted the challenge and went to work with her, but kept this book close at hand because it really did such a nice job in laying out how to lead change. And so it's not about a specific organization, but it's about how does this apply to organizations across the spectrum. I'm going to attempt to apply actual experiences I've had with the various steps within the process along the way. And then we'll close out and happy to take any questions that you might have. Does that sound good? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and thank you for being here. One of the things that I have found significantly important about this work is understanding a little bit about Mr. Kotter. And you can see his seminal work is in business leadership and in leading organizational change and teaching people how to lead organizational change. He received his bachelor's degree from MIT, his master's degree from MIT, and then his doctorate in business administration from Harvard School of Business, in which he was then very quickly scooped up and became a member of the faculty in 1972 at the Harvard Business School, becoming one of the youngest ever Harvard Business School faculty members to be given tenure and a full professorship at the university. So his work has impressed many along the way, and I think you'll see why as we talk a little bit more about Mr. Kotter. Organizational change expert. Organizations are made up of people, right? And so change is not comfortable to most of us, or to most people. But it is essential. Life moves on, things change, and we have to adapt and we have to change for the better and look for opportunities for the better. And so, in essence, it can be difficult and it can be uncomfortable when an organization is transforming, particularly if there's something about that organization that might be failing, right? And so identifying what levers to push and what levers to pull are really important for an individual trying to lead that change. And that is what John Kotter tries to do. John Kotter tries to work closely with individuals and consult now is what he's doing. He's a professor emeritus at this juncture, and he's looking, he has a consulting organization that he helps people lead change through that work. So he retired in 2002, as you can see, and he's a professor of leadership emeritus at Harvard Business School. And in 2008, he co-founded Kotter International, actually with his wife. And that is essentially what he's doing today. And so one of the first things he looked at is, why do organizations fail in change or in leading change? Complacency is one of those reasons. People don't like change. Organizations made up of people don't like change. And so when change comes to bear on an organization, there's oftentimes quite a bit of resistance that can come along with that change. But in order to lead change well, you have to make a really good case as to why you're changing. What's the why? Because change for the sake of change isn't good for anyone, right? And so that's one of those things. Complacency is another important factor in that change, because there's another book that's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. I don't know if you've read that before, but one of the things that Jim Collins says is that good is the enemy of great. If you're trying to move forward and you're trying to make a good organization, a great organization, good can be the enemy of great. That's an important component. And underestimating complexity. So the true complexity of the change. So Kotter found that in leading change, one of the challenges is underestimating the complexity of the change that has to take place, whatever that change is. But don't underestimate the complexity, because if you do, you're bound to fail. You're bound to never make that change. Because a lot of times, in leading change, culture is a really important factor in that. And the organizational culture is an important factor in that. And that runs deep, very deep usually. And so that's an important component. Organizations, they like status quo. A lot of times people are comfortable. People like status quo. We don't necessarily like our cheese moved, you know? So organizations trying to shift it and move things, sometimes it's really clear that things need to change, and sometimes it may not be so clear, but if you're trying to get to the next step, or you're trying to stay ahead of an oncoming change, that's an important thing to consider, is the status quo and the willingness and openness to accept change within an organization. And last, it points out that skipping critical steps in the change process can lead to failure of that change. So we're going to talk more about the steps that he considers. But understanding change, we should know that successful change is not an event. It's a journey. It's a long-term proposition, right? I like to think of things about the work I do around continuous improvement, right? It's not a destination, but it's a constant journey. When you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with organizations, you should think about it in terms of, at least I think you should think about it in terms of an ongoing process, an ongoing journey. Just when you think you've made it there, you can always go a little bit further, right? And so looking at what are those opportunities for that and that kind of change. And change, it says a multi-step process or a multi-stage process, and it's organizations are living organizations. They really are, and you have to read the tea leaves, understand the organization, understand the culture within the organization, understand the environment around the organization when you consider the change that you lead. And then leadership is a key differentiator. Leadership matters in leading change. That's a really important factor that John Kotter found. And he hones in on this along the way in this book and points out different areas where leadership is at the crux of sometimes whether organizational change succeeds or fails. So these are the 8 stages of the change that Kotter points out, that he lays out in the process of change. And one of the first ones, or the first one, the very first one, is establishing a sense of urgency around that change. And that's really critical. If I don't know why we're doing this, and I don't know why we need to change or why we need to move, status quo is just fine. Right? Status quo is just fine. If I think about my own experience here in Beaufort County School District, when I was considering whether or not to apply for the position of superintendent here in the Beaufort County School District, I came here prior to applying. And I spent 4 or 5 days here, and I drove around the entire community, one end of the county to the other. I visited every school from the outside, because I didn't go in because that'd be kind of weird. But I did visit from the outside because I wanted to see the communities that each school was serving. Each school has its own DNA, if you will. Right? And then I'd go to the grocery store, or I'd go to a restaurant, or I'd go to the post office. And I'd ask people, I'd say, hey, I'm thinking about moving here. I have 2 kids. What can you tell me about the school district? And in 2019, I learned a whole lot about the school district. But what I learned at that time that was perhaps most important was that people loved their school because they had a relationship with their school. Their child went there. They might have even attended there. And they loved their school. But they had no relationship with the district or with the district. They had trust issues with the district. They had trust issues with the superintendent. And there were a lot of factors around that. And so one of the things I quickly learned was trust was a big issue in a big deal. The other thing I learned was that the school district had not passed a bond referendum in over 11 years. And that takes its toll on school facilities. And I went home and I thought to myself, can I make a difference in the trust factor? Can I make a difference in the trust factor? And if I can, then I'll apply. And I thought about it for a while. And determined that I thought I could make a difference. And I could certainly change that perspective about the school system. And so I determined that I would apply, and I did. I was selected eventually, and shortly after I was selected, the school board decided that they were going to move forward with a $349 million bond referendum. And I thought to myself at that very juncture, nobody here knows me. Trust is a factor, and how are they going to trust me with $349 million if they don't know me? So, upon arriving here, I created a sense of urgency within the system about the situation we were in, about the trust issues that were very real. And so I decided, how do you fix that? You get to know people, and you let people get to know you. And so I launched the Listen and Learn tour. I moved around the entire community between July, I started on July 1, between July 1 and I believe it was September. And I spent the entire time, through the end of September, 6 days a week, sometimes 7, and sometimes twice a day, at any speaking engagement that I could get to, so I could talk to people, let people know what my vision was, let people know a little bit about me and who I was as a person. And that's all I wanted to talk about. I didn't want to talk about a $349 million bond referendum, because you need to get to know me before you're going to trust me with $349 million. And created a sense of urgency around our work, around building trust within our community. trust was an issue, we had community members that served on a community project review committee looking at what were the needs of the school system at that time. And our community members weighed in on what was on that referendum. Important in helping to build that trust and that connection, reaching out and hearing those voices within the community. Secondly, once that was laid out, the referendum was put together, then we had to inform and educate people in the community. But I didn't start that really until October. I spent 1 month talking about what was on the referendum. I spent about 3 months getting to know people and having people get to know me. And then I established what would be a citizen-led oversight committee to review how we spend every penny of that bond referendum. See, it was about trust, and it was about regaining trust within the community. And if the community had an opportunity to weigh in on what was on the referendum, and then the community had a chance to weigh in on how we were doing on executing on that referendum and how we spent every penny of that referendum, that would help to build and reconstruct trust. How do we connect with parents? How do we connect with the community? That was important, communicating with people. And so we created a sense of urgency around our work to make sure that that people understood within the organization how important this trust factor really was with connecting to our community. And so one of the things that that referendum did was, as we went through in November, that referendum passed with about a 69% approval rating, when the others had failed with about a 70-80% failure rate. And so listening to your community was an important part of that sense of urgency. Establishing what those needs were within the system and having the community have a voice was critical. And then a citizen-led oversight committee was important to show that accountability around how we did our work was going to be extremely important in what we did. And so creating that sense of urgency was essential. Creating a guiding coalition, his second point, is really important, because a guiding coalition basically tells you can't do it alone. The school district can't do it alone. So shortly after, within that first year, I started July 1, 2019, but by March of 2020, we all remember COVID. And schools were shut down in March of 2020. And so we had to figure that part out. But creating a guiding coalition within our system, senior staff members of the organization to help lead this work was important. But you know what else was important? That guiding coalition? Coming out of COVID and getting our students back into school was critical, was important. But one of the things we found was that students in southern Beaufort County had chosen face-to-face instruction. 80% were choosing face-to-face instruction, 20% were choosing virtual. But in northern Beaufort County, 80% of students and families were choosing virtual instruction and 20% were choosing face-to-face instruction. The complete opposite of what was happening in southern Beaufort County. So we had to deal with it. We had to sort out how we were going to deliver services through that. But coming out of it, it was clear that virtual instruction was not quite as effective as face-to-face instruction. And for students at that time, and probably even for educators, because schools, K-12 schools, were not really equipped to do that. We had to learn how to do that on the fly. Right? We're better at it now than we were back then. But at that time, it wasn't something that was common across K-12 school districts across the country. It was something we had to learn how to do. And so that guiding coalition became important because as we exited, we knew we had to make a greater impact on the students in northern Beaufort County because they seem to have had the greatest effect coming out of the pandemic. And so we formed not only our own internal guiding coalition of senior staff members to lead our work, and it's important because you have to have a cross-functional team. You have to have your HR team has to be a part of it. Your communications team has to be a part of the work. Your academic team has to be a part of the work. Your operations and facilities team has to be. So cross-functional teams to lead that change and work is important. But also connecting with your community. We connected with our ecumenical partners across northern Beaufort County and opened up extended learning sites that would take place after school hours to extend the learning for students that had chosen virtual instruction in northern Beaufort County to help increase their growth and their gains. And that partnership and that impact that it has had was actually recognized by the federal government, because I was asked to go to Washington to talk about this program initiative that we had in place with ecumenical partners in order to move student achievement forward for the students who have been in that situation. They were looking for exemplars of how the federal dollars were spent in effective ways, and they had recognized this piece and wanted to know more about it. So it was one of those moments where that guiding coalition was not just ours within the school district, but also in connection with our community and ecumenical partners to deliver that extended support for students as well. Next, he talks about a vision, developing a vision and a strategy. And so that's essential. You've got to create a sense of urgency. You've got to build a coalition that's going to help you lead change. And then you got to make sure that you have the right vision and the right strategy to execute on. And so that's essential. And for me, one of the things I learned, I mentioned to you where my work in transformation began at high school as an assistant principal. But then, after having served as a principal for a few years, the superintendent down there said to me, Frank, I want you to be a director of transformation schools. And in that work, he said, you're going to have 12 schools to supervise. And these are the 12 lowest performing schools in Palm Beach County. And right now, they're all projected to get an F rating. And I'm not having any F-rated schools, you understand? So we went to work, but we focused our work around culture, systems, and instruction. And so a lot of my vision around transforming schools is grounded in culture, in building systems, and in delivering high-quality instruction. And I usually do it in that order. I try to work on it in that order. Culture is an all-the-time thing. You are always working on culture. But that's important because if your culture is not right, your systems fall apart. And when your systems fall apart, it's really hard to deliver high-quality instruction for students, right? And so focusing around culture, systems, and instruction was an important vision. And how did we do that? Because we wanted to establish a high-performing culture, one that was about continuous improvement. One of the greatest aspects in learning is failing. When you fail, you learn from that experience, and you're better off down the road. So continuous improvement is not something to be feared. It doesn't mean that you're failing. It means that you're on your trajectory towards accomplishing what your goals are. And so establishing an opportunity for teachers to work together through what we call professional learning communities helps build a culture of high expectations within the organization. It helps teachers with their planning and their organization for high quality instruction. And it's one of those systems that falls within schools and the work that schools do to lead change. And so that developing a vision and a strategy for change is critically important, is one of those highlights that Kotter talks about. So sense of urgency, a guiding coalition, developing a vision and a strategy to lead that change is important. He also talks about communicating the change vision. If you know where you're going, you can't be the only one in the organization that knows where you're going. right? Or where you're trying to take the organization, you have to communicate that, and you have to do it often. You have to do it frequently. You have to do it often. Getting an opportunity to go out with those listen and learn tours was important because I got to meet so many people during those first several months, right? And communicating who I was, what my vision was for our school system was really essential in building support within the community to help us do our work. And I don't have to tell you, when COVID hit, if we remember, there weren't any speaking engagements going on, right? So there was a lot of important information that I was able to get out to all aspects of our community, or all areas of our community, between July of 2019 and March of 2020, right? That I no longer had the same flexibility to do. I had to find different ways to do that during COVID. But communication about your vision, communicating about your change, communicating about where you are within the process of that change is important because members of your organization want to know, members of your community outside your organization want to know and should know. And that's really an important piece. For us, to give you an example, how you communicate, how you market it is really essential. I set a very bold and audacious goal for our students. 75, 75, 92. That's 75% in ELA, 75% in mathematics, and 92% graduation rate. I say that's bold because most places aren't anywhere near that, right? Every place has its challenges. For us, it's a huge jump in a 5-year period. It's about 30 points on a 5-year period. But communicating 75, 75, 92 is really important. And making sure that everybody within our organization knows what our strategic plan says and what those long-term, bold, audacious strategic goals are is important. And members of our community, 75, 75, 92. And I'll tell you one quick story. Do we have any hopeless romantics here? Okay. We live in a beautiful place. The skies are beautiful. The moon is beautiful when you have a full moon out. And when you see that full moon, you're out on a midnight stroll on the beach or for a walk with your significant other and you see that full moon, you know what I want you to think? 75, 75, 92. I hope I didn't ruin it for you. But if you see it, I'll bet you'll remember. What is it? Communicating it and doing it often is really important in leading change. The other piece is empowering broad-based action. I'm not a micromanager. I never have been. I hated it when it was done to me. I believe in hiring good people, and I believe in trusting them to do their work. I want to be briefed, but I'm not going to micromanage, right? And empowering people that you trust in that guiding coalition to help you lead that change is essential in transforming organizations. When COVID hit, at the end, we were looking, how do we get back in school? One of the groups of people that had the hardest time were our educators in coming back to face-to-face instruction. Because nobody knew what that was going to be like. So we spent a lot of time collecting data, not just on how our students were doing in virtual instruction, but collecting data from school districts who had gone back just briefly before we did, and seeing what kind of infection rate was taking place within schools at that time. And through it created a sense of urgency for coming back to school. coming back to face-to-face instruction, cautiously, but coming back, because we knew it was essential to delivering the high-quality instruction that we needed. And we knew that virtual wasn't having the same impact or effect as face-to-face instruction. And so, what was important about it, in terms of returning to school, was that I think everybody thought we were going to do this at Thanksgiving, right? And we were looking at what possibilities. There was never a good time. There's always a holiday. There's always places where people get together and come back together and things spread and all that kind of stuff. There's never a good time. And so we had to figure out when was the right time. There wasn't a good time, but the right time was as soon as possible. And so there was a lot of pushback around it, and people got together and said, in January, we're going to come back in January. We'll be ready to go in January. Okay? January it is. And we focused our efforts around planning and preparing for January, and not after Thanksgiving, right? And so, never heard another word from anybody else. But over the holiday break, about 2 days before school started, my cell phone started beep. I was like, I knew we needed to be back in school. And I thought to myself, I'm on vacation. I'm not taking those calls, I'm not listening to those things, I'm putting my head down and we were marching forward. And we did. And we managed to come back in school. I had to help make that sense of urgency and the safety case for our members. I had an infectious disease expert from MUSC come and speak to our board and publicly make comments around what they were finding across the country. And so it was important and helpful. We ended up being one of the first in South Carolina to come back to face-to-face instruction. Not the first. I'd like to see what happens first. When people with 22,000 families are tested in their children, I'd like to see what's happening first. Empowering a broad-based action and helping people make decisions and trusting them to make decisions is essential and important. Then you have generating short-term wins. You got to build those short-term wins because it helps keep the change alive. A lot of times change is not a quick thing. Most of the time, complex change within large, complex organizations isn't an overnight thing. Not if it's lasting and sustainable change. And so you have to generate quick wins that the organization can find. One of those happened to be for us here. That referendum, that 2019 bond referendum. Because it was early on, because there was so much at stake in terms of our facilities, right? That as we went around and educated and informed our community about what was on that referendum, and then we established that citizen-led oversight committee, and then it went passed with a 69% approval rating from the community. One of the things we had done leading up to it was to build architectural plans for an additional wing at May River High School and an additional wing at River Ridge, two of the county's most overcrowded schools. So we had architectural plans ready to go, which meant it passed in November. We got bond referendum dollars started to flow in February, and we broke ground in February. Very quick turnaround, a very quick short win that was really important for the organization. And because they could start to see progress, they could start to see the community's dollars at work in improving our facilities. And so that was essential and that was important. And so generating short-term wins is essential in keeping that change alive. And then you have consolidating those gains and producing more change. I built in positions of we called executive directors into the organization. See, when I got here, there were 40 people that reported directly to the superintendent. 32 principals. senior staff at the district, and my assistant. 40 people that reported directly to the superintendent. And it's very difficult to impact meaningful change with that broad kind of base of people that you're supervising. So executive directors help me to bring the supervision of school sites and principals down to around a 10-to-1 ratio, which is much more manageable and much more effective, certainly in leading any kind of change within the organization. So that was essential to make that transition. And so we were able to take wins that we got, bake them into the organization, and continue the change in building systems and building high-quality instructional opportunities for students. And finally, the eighth stage is anchoring new approaches in the culture. So if you want it to be sustainable, you have to impact the culture of the organization. You have to try to constantly work at culture. Culture is an all-the-time thing. I talked about culture, systems, and instruction. Culture eats systems for lunch any day of the week. So you have to work at that culture constantly and expect high quality. Expect high-performing cultures. And when it's not happening, you have to call it out. When it's not happening, you have to lead that change. You have to make sure you're present to do it. And so anchoring new approaches into the culture is important because it helps it become sustainable. Whatever that change is, if you build it into the culture, it becomes much more sustainable. Talks about if you follow that process, if you anchor in on that 8-step process, one of the things that's really critical is the leadership in that organization. You want to make sure that the leadership in that organization is true to what you are trying to accomplish, your strategic vision, your strategic mission, and that they understand the change process and the change stages. Because if you take components of it for granted, right, you leave some gaping holes. It's very difficult to change that culture if you leave gaping holes in that change process. So, some final thoughts, and then I'm happy to take questions from you. In this 8-stage process, understanding that change is difficult because status quo is comfortable. Complacency is comfortable. I had a friend of mine that was a superintendent who used to say, if you've got an organization that needs significant change, when you come in, hit it hard, and then hold on for dear life, because that change is going to bring it right back. So you got to hold that change where you're at, right? So that's an important component. That process of leading change helps you make significant, make that more real in terms of the change in the culture. Then, understanding that it is a roadmap. He will tell you, Kotter will tell you that his 8-stage process is a roadmap and a blueprint for leading change. His research has shown over and over again in organizations what has caused failure within those organizational change efforts. And then what he has tried to build is a roadmap that helps you overcome what those changes might be, what those failures might be. And then leading change requires one, strong leadership. Perseverance and persistence is essential. Making sure you have a clear vision that your organization knows and that even outside your organization knows and understands what you're trying to accomplish. And then cultural reinforcement within your organization. Celebrate what's right with your organization. Celebrate what those values of the organization are. Whenever you see those values playing out, make sure you celebrate it. I've got bus drivers that I go and spend time with because when they pick up children in the morning, they make sure that those children get to school with a smile on their face and that their ride to school that bus driver is the very first person they see and the very last person they see every single day. And so we want to make sure that those values are being carried out throughout the organization. It's not just the senior leadership. It's not just our teachers in the classroom. It's not just our school principals, but every aspect of our organization. And that's really, really important in terms of culture and cultural unification. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, anybody got a question? In the microphone.
I want to stay out of the political arena, but your model, the Secretary of Defense tried to transform the Department of Defense into the Department of War, and the big element that's missing, which he said is essential, is the trust factor. So is that doomed to failure? How would you advise the Secretary of War?
Well, I don't know if it's doomed to failure or not, but certainly I don't know if I'm qualified to know all the ins and outs of that organization. But I do believe that trust is essential. There's another book really important too in your studies and in your readings, if you ever get a chance. It's called The Speed of Trust. Right, and that's very, very important. It focuses in on trust and how quickly it is to gain. How quickly it is to lose it, and how hard it is to gain it, and how hard it is to rebuild it. And but I do think that the speed that trust is a factor in leading change in any organization. It happened to be very real here from my homework prior to accepting the role and accepting the job. But trust within and without the organization is important. In private organizations, I don't know, maybe they may not care about trust outside the organization. But in public organizations like your school system or like government, I do believe trust is essential, and trust is an important component of what we're called to do. And it certainly helps when you have trust from those that you are blessed to lead.
What did you mean by ecumenical? Was that church?
Yep, ecumenical partners. So essentially, what we wanted to do was to make sure that students got the extra help and support that they needed. So we hired retired educators, and we connected them to the ecumenical partners we had because they're strategically located closer to homes for students. And they would work with smaller groups of students at a time. And we would work with them, share data that we had about how those students were doing and what the needs were that were identified by those students' teachers. And those are the needs that they worked on. Because they're retired educators, they're familiar with the standards that we teach and that we're required to teach from the state of South Carolina. And so it was a natural component. And the ecumenical partners, it took place closer to home at churches, but there was no religious instruction as a part of it.
Thanks. This question is coming from 30 plus years in the classroom and 20 years in the school board. Teachers, I found as a whole, are probably more reluctant to change than the vast majority of people. So how do you dismay that when we've always done it this way when you're trying to invoke change, and how do you get teacher buy-in for that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I try to use is a story. If you'll permit me, I'll give you a short synopsis of that story. Okay? And that is, we've always done it this way is a very real thing in resisting change. All right? But do you know about the train tracks? No? On the train tracks, the width of train tracks, 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide. Do you know why that is? because when they were building the train tracks here in the United States, we had help and assistance from our European friends in England who had built train tracks that were 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide. And do you know why theirs were 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide? Because they followed a lot of the routes that were sort of in the grooves on the roads that had been built in Europe. And so it made sense to follow that because it kept trains on the tracks as opposed to falling off, right? And why? Because those were built originally for wagons, and those wagons needed the wheels would break on those wagons if they weren't fitting within those grooves, so to speak, within the roads. And do you know why those were 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide? Because the roads were built by the Roman Empire. And you know why the Roman Empire built them at 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide? Because they used chariots. And do you know what pulled the chariots? 2 Roman horses. And the width of 2 Roman horses' rear ends was 4 feet, 8.5 inches wide. So there may be better ways to do things than we've always done them, haven't we? Yes, sir.
That sort of raises the same question I was thinking about. Sometimes change is not necessary or even useful. And how do you decide which is which? Because sometimes there's the management concept of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I like that concept too, by the way. Change for the sake of change isn't always good.
I think those rails are useful, so there's no need to change them.
Could be, right? But I think you need to look at one of the things that happens over time is evolution of technology and systems within the organization. And so certainly that evolution of technology plays a factor in life. I mean, we're seeing it today. We're seeing it today with the rise of AI and how AI fits into what we do. And, you know, we could debate forever on whether that's a good change or a bad change, but it's here and it is impacting organizations, individuals, life, some for the better, some not so much. And so I think you have to look at what your strategic goal is, what your vision is, where you're trying to take the organization, what are the goals you're charged with achieving or you're looking at achieving, and how does that fit into the work that's being done. And maybe it's not a change that has to be done. Maybe it's not a change that has to be done today, right? And those are all strategic decisions that I believe you have to make in leading change. Sometimes I know something has to change, but it doesn't need to change today. I've got plenty of work that I can do within this to move the organization forward and get things ready to go before that change needs to happen, right? And so that should lay into your strategic plan that you can look at and say, you can't do everything at one time. So what are you going to hone in on first? What's the greatest return on investment? You know, perfect example. When I got here, the starting salary for teachers was $37,500 in 2019. When I started teaching in 1993, the starting salary that I received in Palm Beach County, Florida was $30,000. A career, basically, 26 years. And the difference from what I made to what a starting teacher was making here was $7,500. So we looked at where we sat and ranked in the state of South Carolina. 53rd in the state of South Carolina is where we ranked at that time. And then I thought to myself, we got to do something about this, right? And so the first thing I did was look internally within the organization to find things that had a low return on investment, things that we'd always done it that way, and we were going to keep doing these things. And so we looked at those first, and we cut programs out that were low return on investment. We didn't get rid of people. We repurposed people, because one of the things we're also going through is critical shortage in teachers, critical shortage in educators, right? And so $37,500 is not going to attract a lot of people. If you're serious about it, you need to do something about it. And so for us, we made a significant impact. I focused the budget on that. I found more than 50% of the dollars to make an impact on that teacher salary that year from within the organization, and repurposed dollars to do that. And then I went to county council, because we have to have our budget approved by county council, and we raised the millage enough to get the other 49-50%, right? And we went from being 53rd in the state of South Carolina to being #1 in 1 year. And everybody in the system knew. We went from $37,500 to $50,000, right? Today, we stand at $60,000 in teacher salary, starting teacher compensation. And that's a 63% increase from where we were in 2019. And when we started the school year, back then, we had about 60 classroom vacancies. When we start the school year this past year, we were down to about 18 classroom vacancies. So you attract high-quality educators, you attract people, you let them know you're serious about being a high-performing culture in the organization, and you change the things that you need to change and you can deal with. Salary was something we needed to deal with and do it in right away. That rose to the top where we are for teachers, for classroom teachers, you know. So, you're right, change for the sake of change isn't necessarily good. But if you can be strategic around it and change what needs to be changed, and that calls for decisions. You have to make decisions.
And since you were stupid enough to hand this microphone to me, I'm going to ask you a question. When you're talking about building constituencies and building trust, how much are you engaging the students in these conversations?
Excellent question. All the time. I spend an enormous amount of my time in schools because I want to be in classrooms where the impact of the decisions we make at the district office ultimately are felt. Right? And so I have what I call student advisory meetings, and I go to schools and I meet with groups of 30 to 35 students at every school, and I ask them questions about what their experiences are, what's going well, what could be improved from their lives. The other thing I did was something that most places don't do. I included them in the budget building process for the school system. And back then, in 2019, not in 2019, I think it was 2021, when they brought this up, you know what they said? Teacher salaries. Teacher salaries, so we can keep the teachers we have. They're very insightful. Students are very, very insightful. And our organization exists to provide them with a great education. We should hear from them. Yes, sir. 75, 75, 92, we're in the second year of 75, 75, 92. In terms of English language arts, I've got a chart, right, that shows that trajectory for English language arts that's necessary, and that trajectory for mathematics that's necessary, and that trajectory for graduation rate. In English language arts, we have earned the highest scores in school district history on the current state assessment at every single grade level for every single subject. We are not at 75, but we're on that trajectory and on that line in the growth we're making every single year to get there. In mathematics, math is what was hit the hardest by the pandemic. The Secretary of Education at the time said that the impact across the country was decades long. Decades. For us, we were hit the hardest in math. I don't know that it was decades long, but it was significant. And so on that trajectory for math, we are just slightly below where we needed to be last year. So we've doubled down, we've looked at what kind of things we could do, and we put some additional supports in place. And this year we've got to do not only what that trajectory says, but a little bit more to get back on track. So we're working on that. And then on our graduation rate, we have the highest graduation rate in school district history. And we're on that trajectory to 92, we're on the line. And then the other thing we have is our college or career readiness, which is the highest that our school districts have ever. So we're on the right path in terms of what we're doing. We've got to double down in math because the work in math is really, really hard. And moving student achievement in math, it is really, really hard. Because a lot of the students missed the foundational components when they missed that face-to-face instruction for about a year. And math is really one of those things that builds on top of the year before, you know. And so what was really encouraging to see is that our elementary scores last year, our elementary scores were on the trajectory that we needed it to be. Our middle schools and high school scores were not quite on that trajectory, and so we moved forward and we made progress, just not the amount of progress we needed to make to stay on that trajectory. So we've got our focus, we've got our mission, and that's what we're working on. It's a great question. Yes?
What we love seeing in the classroom is if you would add a program to your school, what kind of program would you add as a budget definition?
Okay. What do I love seeing in the classroom? I love to see student discourse about what they're learning. I want to see our students talking and engaging with one another about what they're learning. You know, some people feel like, well, students are talking, you know, that's a bad thing. It's an unruly classroom. No, not really. If students are talking about what they're learning, if there's constructive and talk about whatever it is they're learning, and if they're struggling productively with the information they're learning, I love to see it. They're being challenged, and they're discussing and having academic conversations about their learning. When I see that, it makes my day. You know, in terms of programs that we would like to offer for students, you know, we have tons of academic programs already that are really, really, I think, successful. We've got programs for our highest achieving students where, you know, they're earning college credit and everything else along their journey. We just started a TIDES program where students go in there in 9th grade. It's a partnership with technical colleges in the Low Country. When students graduate, they graduate not only with a high school diploma, but they'll graduate with an AA degree, maybe 2 AA degrees. So that is a really, really high-powered educational experience for students who are ready. Some are ready for that, you know. We have programs that support our neediest students, you know. We have 20% of our students in Beaufort County are multilingual learners, right? That's more than double the state's average of multilingual learners across the state. But here in Beaufort County, it's more than double. We have programs to support multilingual learners in their learning and in their work. So I think one of the things we're seeing is that colleges and universities provide a certain experience for students and receive certain degrees. Career technical education is just as valuable, and there are tremendous opportunities for students through the career tech ed field. And we have high-powered career tech ed programs for our students in our high schools, in our middle schools, exploratory programs in our elementary schools, and then we also have ACE, which sits halfway between Beaufort and and Bluffton, and that's a career tech ed space that we share with Jasper County. So, I mean, I think one of the things that's up and coming, I don't know that it requires a ton of dollars, but it does require learning about how to deliver it and how to provide it for students, is this information business around artificial intelligence and opportunities to know how to navigate that, know how to use it appropriately. Those are all, I think, important factors. So at the moment, I don't have a particular thing that if money wasn't an option. I think we work really hard at providing experiences that we feel our kids need, and we work closely with regional workforce partners to try to identify what are the regional workforce needs to create opportunities for kids. Like we have a biomedical program as an example, and a cybersecurity program for students where they work closely. Biomedical works closely with Beaufort Memorial Hospital. The cybersecurity program works closely with the military. So there's lots of experiences that our kids get from school. School's really different than it was when I went to school. That's for sure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodriguez.